Good afternoon, everyone. The afternoon session is set to start in a little over 1 minute. So we have two talks in this session, both about the diachronic development of tone and tonal developments. The first talk will be given by Cathryn Young and Chris Donlay, and it is about the diachronic development of tone in Khatso. And the second talk would be by Katya Chirkova about tonal developments in Weimar. Now, Cathryn will present the first talk, and Cathryn, the floor is yours.
Okay, just a second. Okay, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, it looks good. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris.
And I'm Cathryn.
And today we're going to talk about the diachronic development of tone in Khatso. Tone change is one of the most poorly understood areas of sound change research. We know a lot about how tones evolve in the first place, but we don't know a lot about how established tone systems change over time. Though Cathryn has already been doing a lot of interesting work in this area over the past couple of years. Khatso, if you don't know it, is a Tibeto-Burman language that has 8 tones, and that makes it one of the most tonally innovative languages in the family. It shows evidence of tone split, merger, chain shift. It's a really good laboratory for this kind of work. So today our plan is to begin looking at the modern tone system in Khatso. Then we're going to use the Gedney tone box to show the results of tone split and merger that have happened over the years. And then we want to look at tone chain shift. Now, the tone box doesn't work well for that because, of course, a chain shift is a gradual process of interrelated changes. So we're going to borrow some methodology from Bilibov and his study of vowel chain shifts. So we're going to make use of information from 3 different research streams: synchronic variation, dialect variation, and ongoing tone change, to explore what a tone chain shift looks like, and then show you the one that we found in Khatso. So there's no historical data in Khatso, by the way, so we're using the present to interpret the past. Now, as most of you know, Khatso is an endangered Ngwi language. It's related at some remove to Lisu, Lahu, Lalo, etc. And I've been documenting the language for several years now. It's only spoken in a single farming village called Xingmeng in central Yunnan. Village has a population of about 5,600 people. So this is an endangered language. And one of its most unusual features is the fact that it has this very large tone inventory, 8 tonemes, many more than in the typical Ngwi language, which may only have 3 or 5. So there's a lot that needs to be explained here about why Khatso looks the way it does today in modern times. So here we see a graph showing the modern Khatso tone system. What we've done is taken data from 11 speakers, normalized F0 values, so that we can compare them all across all of them in one graph. And these data come from a mini project I did a number of years ago looking at variation. I went to each of the 5 traditional sub-districts of the village and recorded 1 man and 1 woman in each of those sub-districts, all of whom were older than 60 at the time. And then we added data from 1 more speaker, data from Kuei Li, who is my main language consultant and project assistant. Some of you met her in past conferences. And all told, we looked at nearly 1,500 tokens. So if you take a look at the list to the right of the graph, you'll see the list of the actual tonemes there using the Jiao numeral system. So Khatso has 3 even tones, 5, 5, 4, 4, 3, 3, which are represented in green, pink, and yellow as you move your way down the graph. 2 rising tones, 3, 5, and 2, 4, in blue and orange. 2 falling tones, 5, 3, and 3, 1, in purple and brown. And then 1 low falling rising tone in red here, tone 3, 2, 3, in the bottom quadrant of the graph. We have a recording of a minimal octuplet. This is, again, Kwei Li, reading a syllable with all 5 tones in the order that you see here. And we're going to play this a couple of times so you can hear it clearly.
Say, 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 say.
Cathryn, one more time.
Say, 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 say.
So obviously, again, a very large toneme inventory. But notice also that there are no phonation contrasts, nor are there checked tones in this system. And again, that's unusual for the Ngwi family. All of the tones here are in modal phonation. So the big question is, what happened? How did Khatso get all of these tones? Well, if you track the changes from reconstructed Proto-Ngwi to pre-Khatso to modern Khatso, what you find is tone splits, partial tone mergers, and a tone chain shift. So I'll now hand it over to Cathryn, who will walk you through these changes in more detail.
Okay, so here is the reconstructed tone system for Proto-Ngwi. This is the ancestor language of all the Ngwi languages based on Bradley 1977. And please ask me later why I think this is a pretty accurate reflection of what Proto-Ngwi tone actually sounded like. So Proto-Ngwi had what they call a 3+1 tone system, where there was a 3-way tonal contrast in syllables that ended with a vowel or a nasal. So we call that 1, 2, and 3. And a 4th category that was stop final. So Matisoff 1972 reconstructs a tone split in 4 according to the Proto-Ngwi prefix or initial type. And this follows the voiced low principle. So you've got a lower pitch after voiced initials and or voiced prefixes, and a slightly higher pitch after voiceless initials or voiceless prefixes. For our purposes today, I want you to especially note that tone 1 is in the upper pitch range, tone 2 and tone L are in the lower pitch range. And what we'll see that in Khatso, they have shifted. Tone 1 reflexes in Khatso are in the lower pitch range, part of tone 2, and all of tone L is in the upper pitch range. So now we're ready to show the splits and partial mergers that have occurred in tone, historic tone categories 1, 2, and 3. Tone splits and mergers are usually depicted by a tone box, a tool that was popularized by Gedney, 1972, where the rows are different initial consonant types, syllable initials, and the columns on the right are different tone categories. So the boxes that we see are the modern tone reflexes of the combination of syllable initial consonant and tone category. And this tone box tool is very useful for showing the transfer of contrast from historic initial consonant to the tone. So we can reconstruct pre-Khatso with a three-way contrast in stops and affricates. So row A is voiceless aspirated, row B voiceless unaspirated, and row C voiced, and a two-way contrast in sonorants. So we had glottalized nasals and approximants versus plain sonorants in row C. So what happened in Khatso is that voiced stops devoiced. They became voiceless unaspirated consonants, and glottalized sonorants became plain sonorants. And as that happened, these mergers led to the tone split that we see in tone 1, where row B now has a contrastive mid-rising tone, and row C has a contrastive low-rising, sometimes dipping tone. With voiceless aspirated consonants and voiceless fricatives, we see a mid-level tonal reflex in tone 1, and this led to the partial merger of tone 1 with tone 3, which is also mid-level tone. In tone 2, which in Proto-Ngwi was a low tone, we see row A and row C, so voiceless aspirated and voiced consonants, retain this low falling tone value, but after voiceless unaspirated and glottalized sonorants, they jump. The tone jumps to high. Tone 3 didn't do anything. It's just stayed as a 3-3 tone. So let's go back and look at what these tones sound like today. The left diagram shows Khatso tone reflexes of historic tone categories 1 and 3. And just to remind you, tone 1 was high, but now we see it either as mid-rising, low-rising, or mid-level, merging with tone 3. And in tone 2 has retained its low tone value after aspirated and voiced initial consonants, but after voiceless unaspirated and glottalized sonorants, we see it jumping up into the upper pitch range. And this jump up into the upper pitch range results in a partial tone merger with 4A, which I'm gonna show you in a minute. Here are some example words for tone 1. So the second column is the reconstruction of Proto-Ngwi by Bradley, and the last column on the right is Khatso, with the 3 different colors showing the 3 tone values that we see now for tone 1 that are now contrastive because of mergers in the initial consonants. I also include other languages like Lalo and Lopa because I think they're showing related changes, but we don't have time to go into that right now. So here are the tone 2 examples where we see the row A, so pre-Khatso aspirated and voiceless fricatives retaining the low falling tone value. Also row C, historically voiced initials retaining that low value, but jumping up to high after pre-Khatso voiceless unaspirated, and you can see these were probably glottalized sonorants. These have jumped up to high. So let's move on to what happened in tone 4. This is the stop final category. In many Ngwi languages, there was a two-way split in tone 4 between H and L. But in Khatso, the development is a bit more complicated. What I think happened is that H and L were contrastive in pre-Khatso, but only after aspirated stops. And I think that because they now have different tone values. But for other historic initial types, they were conditioned by the pre-Khatso initial consonant type to show this three-way tone split, with row A showing a high level tone, row B a high rising tone, and row C a high falling tone. Now row A, B, and C, they're basically the same as the tone box I just showed you for 1, 2, and 3. The only difference is sibilants. Sibilants are included in row B, so they also show this 3-5 tone. Okay, so here are some tone 4 examples with pre-Khatso aspirated initials from H getting a high tone, some voiceless fricatives as well. Then unaspirated stops plus S plus glottalized sonorants getting this high rising tone. This should make you think of Lahu's high rising tone. And then voiced, historically voiced or pre-Khatso voiced initials plus any aspirated consonants from tone L getting a high falling tone. So let's look at what these three tones look like now. So in Proto-Ngwi, none of these, neither H nor L were in the upper pitch range, but in Khatso, they are now the three highest tones in the system. So here is the resulting tone system of Khatso, except now the legend shows the historic origin of each tone. There's also a new tone in pink, this 4/4 tone, which doesn't seem to have a historic source in any Proto-Ngwi tone category. So we think instead it was added in at a later stage, either through tone sandy patterns or Chinese loan words, of which there are many, or a combination of those two factors. So we're going to argue that a tone chain shift has occurred in Khatso. A chain shift is a series of two or more changes that are related through a kind of chain reaction. So to illustrate Khatso's tone chain shift, we compare it with the Central Lalo tone system. Central Lalo is another Ngwi language, and I'm using it here as a proxy for Proto-Ngwi tone, since it retains the Proto-Ngwi tone system with tone 1 in red as high, tone 2 in brown as low, tone 3 in yellow as mid, tone 4A or H in green as mid and tense, tense phonation, tone L, or you could call it tone 4BC as low falling or mid falling with tense phonation. So what has happened in Khatso is that tone 1 has gone down, has gone into the lower pitch range and split. But you notice that two of its modern reflexes have a rise. So the mid-rising and this low-rising, sometimes dipping tone, and then the partial merger with tone 3. So it's gone down into the lower pitch range, whereas tone 2B and tone 4A have gone up together, merging into this high level tone, and tone 4B and C splitting, with 4B becoming a high rising tone and 4C becoming this high falling tone. So there's a shift. What was high is now low, and what was low is now high. So how did this tone chain shift unfold? Well, we don't have a time machine, so there's no way of witnessing the tone chain shift as it occurred. So we're going to borrow Lebov's approach to vowel chain shifts in his book, Principles of Language Change, where he uses the present to interpret the past. And we can do this because it is safe to assume that the same mechanisms that affect tone in the present were also at work in the past as well. So we'll use evidence from these three streams of research: synchronic contextual tone variation, tone change in progress, what we'll be comparing with the tone change shift in Thai, and dialect variation, what we'll compare with the tone change shift in Lalo. So synchronic variation feeds into diachronic change. And it's especially important to know if there's a phonetic bias behind the variation. In other words, does the variation show a specific trend that is rooted in the mechanics of tone production? And I believe, yes, there's a very simple principle at work here, and that is making a change in pitch takes time. So the muscles in the larynx adjust the length and tension of the vocal folds to change the frequency of vibration. So you can't instantaneously switch between pitches, between frequencies. In fact, making shifts in pitch is a bit slow, it's a bit sluggish compared to how fast we can produce consonants and vowels. And this constraint becomes very important in syllable tone languages, where the tonal domain is the syllable as opposed to the word. So one of the consequences of tonal sluggishness is called the carryover effect, where a preceding tone has an effect on a following tone. And this is a very common cross-linguistic effect found in syllable tone languages. So let's compare the different carryover effects that we see on a high tone versus a low tone. So looking at figure 1, these are the F0 tracks for 2 syllable sequences in Mandarin. On the second syllable on the this top right panel shows tone 1 in Mandarin, the high level tone, ma. Bottom right panel is tone 3, the low or dipping tone, ma. So look what happens to a high tone. If it follows another high tone, then nothing happens. The high tone is immediately, the tone target is immediately reached. But if it follows any other tone in the system, the F0 at syllable onset is lowered and the high tone is realized through a rising F0 track as it approaches, as the tonal target is approached. Okay, so look at what happens now to the low tone. When it follows a high or a rising tone, the onset is considerably higher. So it's no longer a low tone, it's more like a mid-falling or even a high-falling tone. So to sum up here, because it takes time to make a change in pitch, there are a lot of contexts in which a high tone is going to be realized with a rising F0 trajectory, and a low tone is going to be realized with a falling F0 trajectory. Now, what if listeners reinterpret the variance that they're hearing as the intended cue to that tone? Well, the door to sound change is then opened. So we're going to be using tonal acoustic space to depict the tone change shift. So I got this idea from Shen Reiting, and we're just using a 2-dimensional space of pitch, height versus slope. Here's an example from Miancheng Chinese. And what I want you to notice here is that the tones are moving in a clockwise direction. This is what Zhu et al. Call the clockwise tone change shift. So high becoming rising, high falling becoming high level, mid falling becoming high falling. A tone change shift has happened in Bangkok Thai. So the diagram on the left from Padiaporn's book shows tone 3, or the falling tone in Thai, was mid-falling in the early 20th century, but by 1962, it was a high falling. Tone 4, or the high tone in Thai, was a high rising falling in the early 20th century, but by 1962, it was a high rising tone. So we can depict this again in tonal acoustic space as a clockwise shift of tone 3, tone 4, tone 5, which was the rising tone, is now flattened out. So it is also taking part in this tonal change shift. In fact, Shu Yi and I did a review across 45 different languages ongoing tone changes that were reported in these languages. And we found that 56% of the reported changes fit into the clockwise directionality. And so you'll remember what we saw about the contextual variation is that high tones are often realized with a rising trajectory, low tones are often realized with a falling trajectory, and that is the clockwise direction. So the ongoing tone changes match the synchronic variation patterns. This makes me think that clockwise directionality is phonetically motivated. In other words, it's rooted in the mechanics of tone production. So now we're going to look at dialect variation within the Lalo language cluster. Not that we're saying Lalo should be subgroup with Khatso, but Lalo dialect variation gives us a more finely grained picture of the intermediate stages in a tone change shift. So here are the tone plots of tone 1. Red line is after voiced consonants and yellow line after voiceless, where the purple line is tone L, or you could call it tone 4BC. And it's arranged with the tonally conservative on the left and tonally innovative on the right. So what I want you to notice is a gradual pathway of the purple line going up, entering the upper pitch range, becoming high rising, falling, and ending up as a high rising, and the tone 1 entering the lower pitch range as a rising tone and then flattening out, and then after voiceless initials going down to merge with mid. So we can depict this with tonal acoustic space. So you see 1AC moving to the right and down as 4BC moves up from low falling to high falling, then to high rising. 1B merging with 4A. So you can see the tones moving in a clockwise direction. So now that we've looked at shallow time depth changes in Bangkok Thai and Lalo, we're ready to reconstruct how the Khatso tone change shift has occurred. And unsurprisingly, we reconstruct it as a clockwise change shift. So here is the tonal acoustic space of Khatso with pitch height, the y-axis, and pitch slope, the x-axis. So when you see this animation, it's depicting tone change shift in Khatso as a clockwise shift. I know it looks complicated, but it's really just a slightly more elaborate version of what happened in Lalo, with 4B moving up and to the right, 1B and C moving down and to the left, 4C moving up. So to conclude, Khatso shows multiple tone splits, mergers, and a change shift. To reconstruct how the tone change shift happened, we look at changes that have happened at a much shallower time depth, where we get a clearer picture of the process with all the gradual intermediate stages. And by doing that, we propose that Khatso tone change shift was also happened as tone 1, tone 2, and tone 4 moved in a clockwise direction through tonal acoustic space. So just as using the present to interpret the past worked well for doing research on vowel change shifts, I also believe that this is the way forward for research in tone change shift. Here are our references. Thanks.
So thank you, everyone. We'd be happy to take some questions now. You can also email us at any time later if you like. Our emails are on the handout, which I think you might have by now, and it's also in the abstract book. So happy to talk to people even after today.
Thank you, Yang Sensei. Thank you, Donlay Sensei, for a tonally brilliant presentation. This is extremely substantial, so questions could bear on any of the three main topics: diachrony, the tonal acoustic space modeling, dialectology. Of course, I have questions, but I let people think of questions they might want to ask first. So
I already see 3 hands up. Martine, would you like to ask your question first?
All right, thank you. Well, thank you for a very fascinating paper. Of course, I already knew this research and appreciated it beforehand. I would have several questions, but I want just to make a small remark, which is that this shift in phonetic realization of the tones without merger or split does happen all over the place. And it happens not only in syllabic tone languages, as has been mentioned, but I have the same thing in the Tamang group, between Tamang and Takali and Manong, and different dialects even of the same language, where I have word tone, and I also have shifts from low to high, different tones shifting that way, with, of course, melodic tones. So I just wanted to mention this as a general generalization somehow of the suggestion which has been made here, and certainly I appreciate very much your research on this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martine, for your comment. We have a question from David Bradley.
Yes, thank you very much. I really like this paper. I'm convinced, and I think you have a very good handle here on one of the ways that we can see tone change in progress, which is a great innovation, and in fact, parallel to Leboeuf's innovation for looking at vowel change in progress. My one actual comment or question concerns your intermediate stage for the sonorants with various S or glottal stop prefixes, in which you were saying that you wanted these to be pre-glottalized at the pre-Khatso stage. I think one might want to think about this, yes, that's the one. One might want to think about this as a process where you have phonologized the prefixes into the initials at an earlier stage before we start making the tone changes. So I suspect that by the stage that these tone changes were occurring, these forms, these pre-glottalized sonorants, nasals and the lateral, might conceivably have been voiceless, because we see that they are voiceless, for example, in Nasu and Nosu. And also we see that the lateral at least is voiceless in Nisu. And these are three languages that are more or less all around Khatso. We also see, as you know, Cathryn and Chris, the same initials in Nisu, for example, having the same high tone outcome as in Lalo, as in Khatso, because of the fact that they used to be distinct and I think perhaps voiceless. And that fits them, I think, more closely with the other manner constants that you're attributing to this particular outcome. So that's just my comment, but otherwise really wonderful and I think very convincing. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
yes.
David.
I think I am influenced by Lalo, the fact that Lalo retains pre-glottalized sonorants. So I thought, oh, maybe Khatso did at some point as well, but I don't actually know that.
Okay, here's an example of Tito's law. It's the law that says the proto-language is always closest to the first language that you work on.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for the exchange. Shenrui has a question or comment.
Hi, thank you for a really, really great talk. And also thank you for citing the TAS introducing my PhD dissertation. And I especially like the dynamic graph, which you can see the tonal change very clearly. And I think my question goes to Cathryn, because I've been following your work for quite a long time. And you have introduced the clockwise tonal change, and you have using the empirical data and introduced and early in your early paper. And I think while I agree that the clockwise change is tested in many languages, it is true. However, I think a potential danger of overinterpret the effect of the clockwise effect is that first, I think is because the tonal space might be different from vowel space in that it does not have an angle. It's very hard to have like ERU, which is a periphery space, which you can kind of stay there, and so the tonal shift of vowel may different from the tonal shift may be different from vowel shift in terms of different nature of the space. And so once the tonal change starts, to avoid the merger, then the tone category does not want to merge in the middle area, then it has to go somewhere. So the clockwise effect may be due to this effect. And that's my very preliminary thinking. And another interesting observation of your data is that we have first see a very complex tonal system with a lot of tones. This is also true in Northern Ming, because Northern Ming also have many tones, and they are all level and without many phonation contrast. And you can observe some of the clockwise change, but also some kind of merge or some kind of a very large shift around the space. So I'm thinking of maybe we need to separate different tonal system. One may be a tonal system with smaller tones, and the other maybe with very large number of tones. So that's just some food for thought. Thank you.
That's a very good point, because as we do more research on these very elaborate tone systems, certain trends, cross-linguistic trends appear, like they're much more likely to have some sort of phonation as part of the cue. They're more likely to, of course, have contour. So we would need to think about what the space, yeah, that's a really good point. Think about what the tonal acoustic space looks like for this particular language that we're looking at. Because I don't think we have really good grasp at this point. You certainly wouldn't want to use the same space for every tone language that you're working with yet. Maybe we'll be there someday, but we're not there yet.
Well, in the meantime, thank you for opening this space, which is a research space where people can try to project the knowledge they have about, cross-linguistic tendencies, and think about what they believe would be necessary additions. If I may ask a question, unless there's other hands raised, I was wondering how also, maybe an unfair question to you right now, but a general question that the tonal acoustic space raises is, where could phonation types fit in? And I feel warranted asking the question because it's not just as a sniping outsider who wants to push phonation into the picture, but Ngwi itself has some languages where phonation types are part of the phonology, and under which circumstances would it be possible for a tone system to pick up a certain phonation type in a certain corner of the tonal acoustic space? And what do you think Ngwi dialectology could contribute to this ambitious program? Maybe call it a panchronic program about tonal evolution. because we have these pieces coming together. You know, there's European tone as well, where they like to talk about clocks, looking at dialects, and they do find some trends, and you know, from other areas as well. So that would be the general question: where would phonation fit in the picture?
Mhm.
If that makes any sense.
Wow. Yeah. So Shen Ting, you can show phonation, right, in even a two-dimensional space like this by using maybe different size, like different colors. So you could, let's see, you could end up making tonal acoustic space able to show more dimensions. What I think would be interesting is we already know there are some correlates between like what quadrant breathy phonation is going to show up in, right? It tends to be down here in the lower pitch range. But maybe we should ask Martine and you about what happens when those low breathy tones jump up into the upper pitch range. I think they tend to lose breathy phonation. Is that right?
Yes, from my point of view, it's right. Yes.
So there might be, or just like what I've seen in Lalo, when the tense tone, the L tone, jumps up into the upper pitch range, it tends to eventually lose the tense phonation. So while tense phonation in Ngwi languages could be a potential phonetic trigger for the jump up into the upper pitch range, it maybe once it's there, it tends to weaken out, and then you get like pitch contour in this upper pitch range. So there could be a very interesting interaction between. There is an interesting interaction between phonation and pitch as it changes in the different ranges, pitch ranges.
Thank you very much.